Today I'm going to talk about history. Why do we study history? I mean, it's already happened, right? History has been known to repeat itself, and some have said that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. History has repeated itself several times. As with Occupy that happened in New York, so brought reminiscence of the civil rights movement in the American South. Although there is a belief that history does not repeat itself, after all, history cannot happen again. But people repeat the same things that have been tried before in history and failed. The one lesson we've learned from history is that we have not learned any of history's lessons. Take Napoleon Bonaparte. He went in and had a massive empire, and then he wanted to go for Russia, and it was the end of his empire. Adolf Hitler, similarly, also tried to invade Russia after he built his empire, and his empire failed. But even before either one of these military masterminds was Alexander the Great, who also had a desire to claim Russia for his own, and ultimately he failed. He failed to gain control, and it was the end of his empire. Napoleon Bonaparte failed. As with Hitler, he also failed. All three wanted to have control of this massive partially covering continent of a country, but they all failed. And it still stands strong today. We can even look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been fought over for centuries. With the Taliban rule, a lot of countries have tried to go in and take them out. For some reason, everybody gets interested in this country the size of Montana called Afghanistan. Most kids didn't even know where Afghanistan was 15 years ago. But for some reason, everybody wants a piece of Afghanistan. It started off with Great Britain in 1838, all the way through their Second Anglo War. Yes, not once but twice, and failed both times. But even in 1919, in their Third Anglo War, and again were repelled by the Afghan local nationals. Even after that, Russia, NATO. Russia tried in 1978. NATO, in 2001, along with the United States, went into Afghanistan to oust the Taliban, and none of them succeeded, leaving only the United States, still to this day in Afghanistan, fighting the Taliban. And ultimately, it shows that every country to date has failed. All these countries have tried to go into Afghanistan and try to take control or try to gain its resources, and every single one of them have failed. With fashion, you can see some repeating trends as well. You have the 1950s with their long dresses, basic colors, browns, blacks, whites, blues. It was the fashion trends. Ladies wanted to look like ladies. Then came the 1960s, where ladies wore mini skirts, bright colors, sleeveless shirts. They had above ankle or above knee dresses, unheard of. Then in the 1970s, bell bottoms were all the rage, which were fully covering the legs, long sleeves. They still had bright colors, but not quite as flashy as the 60s. 1980s, again, bright colors, flashy, bearing as much skin as possible, just similar to the 60s. But The 1990s. In the 1990s, again, long-legged denim, colorful shirts, but not revealing. Just like the 70s. And then in the 2000s, we go back to ladies wanting to look like ladies. Basic colors, browns, blues, blacks, whites. Today, there's multiple fashion trends that can bring nostalgia of yesteryear, such as the 1970s, even the 1960s, and then just about any era you want to mix in together between the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. They are all coming back. Cell phones has gone through a similar cycle. Back in the 1980s and early 90s, cell phones were big, bulky. Then in the mid to late 90s, they started getting a little smaller with the flip phones, reminiscent of Star Trek. Then in the 2000s, the phones were barely the size of the palm of your hand. Even against a baby, they are relatively small. And now, it's back. Big, monstrous, honking phones that look similar to, that are just as big or bigger than the phones from the 80s, after all the technology to make them as small as possible. Now, it's all about how big. The important thing that we need to learn is that history does repeat, but it's because people do not learn the lessons from history and commit the same mistakes. So remember to study history. That's why we study history, so that we can learn, we can progress, and we can succeed.